Well, ending Russia's war in Ukraine in just 24 hours was one of Donald Trump's many campaign promises. About a month into his second term, his team has unleashed a wave of often contradictory diplomatic statements. We heard it there, first saying Ukraine would need to accept major concessions, but also suggesting the U.S. could apply military pressure to Russia. DW's Nick Connolly asked people in Kyiv how they see the U.S.'s talk about their future.
Does Donald Trump actually have a plan for Ukraine, or is he just making it up as he goes along? For months, Ukrainians were told that a Trump peace plan was on the way. Over the past week, it's often seemed like the new administration in Washington doesn't know what it wants, contradicting itself over and over. For some here in Kyiv, it's too much confusion to handle.
Everyone's getting really worked up. There are lots of changes. I just can't follow it all. I'm filtering it out to protect my mental health. I'll wait and see what happens.
Others aren't convinced that it actually amounts to much.
For now, I don't think a great deal has actually changed. There's lots of talk, lots of announcements, but we'll have to wait and see what actually ends up happening. I think it's Trump just upping the stakes. We shouldn't panic.
Many Ukrainians worry that decisions about their future will be taken without their leaders at the table.
We don't get to decide what happens. None of it is down to us. We're going to have to wait for what's decided elsewhere.
I think Ukraine isn't in control. We're like an ice hockey puck that others are playing with. It's awful. We can't do anything about it.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has already made it clear he won't accept any deal made behind our backs, as he says. He's also rejected a proposed minerals deal with the US, but crucially, it didn't come with any American security guarantees in return.
I'm no fan of Zelensky's, but I think he's getting it right at the moment. He's in a really tough position. He needs to protect our interests. Americans respect people who aren't afraid of standing up for themselves.
That story by Nick Connolly, who joins me now from Kyiv. Nick, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer says he's ready and willing to put British troops on the ground to guarantee security as part of a potential future peace deal. How is this going down in Kyiv?
That is the top story here in Kyiv today, Nicole. It is, from a Ukrainian perspective, a huge step forward. We've had lots of kind of off-the-record briefings, hints that that might be part of some future deal, but also setbacks from a Ukrainian perspective. People like Donald Tusk, the leader in Poland, who otherwise pretty hawkish, pretty supportive of Ukraine, being notably cautious about committing to anything of that kind. And the fact that Keir Starmer has even said that putting those British boots on the ground could put British troops in harm's way if Russia were to invade again in the future, that realization, that kind of willingness to discuss that is seen as a huge basically step change, kind of a gear change. We don't know the details, obviously, if those troops would be on the front lines or if they would be somewhere in central Ukraine, hundreds of kilometers from the front lines, freeing up the Ukrainian army to defend the front lines and protecting kind of the hinterland. But it is something we haven't, frankly, heard any Western leader say so far.
How big of a game changer could this be looking at the overall situation?
So I think it's also really important, off the back of the diplomacy we've seen during the past week, where obviously we've had that kind of transatlantic bust up at Munich, and you've seen the UK government desperate to try and keep Europe and Washington on one page. I think there's going to be the hope from Ukrainian perspective that also will put the Europeans back at the negotiating table and prevent Trump cutting some kind of deal with Putin above, without European involvement, without Ukrainian involvement. Because obviously the kind of worst fear is that Trump and Putin come up with some deal, and then the Europeans are simply asked to implement what Trump has promised to Putin.
Zelensky has been adamant about his red lines in the past. Will he be able to hold on to those much longer?
So I think if we look at territory, right, Ukraine's 2014 internationally recognized borders, so including Crimea and parts of eastern Ukraine that Russia sent its proxies into 10 years ago. I think the question is, does Ukraine have to recognize these territories as being Russian? No, I don't think so. It just has to park this question and say, okay, we'll deal with that in the future through negotiations. I don't think you're going to get Volodymyr Zelensky signing a piece of paper that says that Crimea is Russian. That's just not going to happen. But it can promise to not resolve this issue by force and just to delay the kind of discussion of this to some point in the future. I think that's possible. As for security guarantees, Ukraine is adamant that they're not just going to sign up to some deal with vague promises in return for freezing this conflict and then basically allow the West to move away, move on to other topics and then wait for Putin to come again. So they are going to play hardball. And I think this announcement by Stalmer is the first step towards the kind of non-NATO guarantees to Ukraine that actually could convince Ukrainians that this is a deal worth doing.
Nick Connolly in Kyiv, always great speaking to you. Thanks.